Hi guys, this is part 3, starting at chapter -1. Scars of war are often displayed through physical defilement, such as a missing limb or eye or mental impairment. Either way, the toll of a war on any group or individual can usually be discerned, but there are other not so obvious ways that war and its insidious torment can manifest. He used to be a king, not a genuine mogul, but rather an influential, sought-after man of the community that had the power and the money to get things done. Although the state was huge, it was still, to no uncertain degree, a small community, whereby people helped each other out, swapped necessities, passed on jobs, and prayed at the local temple. Over 500,000 gathered at the local temple, at times bigger than many cities. People came from all over the state and the country to attend to their religious beliefs. Probably even more so since the war had been ongoing now for nigh 20 years. Little by little trade became impossible and tourists dried up. He was a businessman, not so much religious, although he respected the temple and the people who practiced religion. The owner of a once thriving tourist business. It went hand in hand with local manufacturers of delicately crafted wood furniture and cricket bats, sent all over the world. He had contracts with hotels, fishermen, the local floating market, saffron farmers, tour operators, ski fields, and the famous local handmade rugs. His family struggled as much as any family to survive. It was fortunate that for him, having built up such an empire from the beginning and amassing quite large sums of money, he was able to survive. But it wasn't the way of their people to eat while others did not. He would do anything in his power to drive business to others if he could afford it himself. He was many things, but greedy was not one of them. Now and again his brother would contact him from the capital, requesting that he put on his best face for a stray tourist that hadn't heard about the war and was willing to brave any danger to see such a beautiful place as his home. Like a Japanese train, he'd be on time to welcome them to the airport, where he'd whisk them away from any potential danger to the safety of his home. But these times were few and far between. Independence was wearing thin on the people. Fighting hadn't helped, and it didn't look as if there would be any change in the near future. They were beginning to succumb to the chains of a greater conqueror, whether it was a bad thing or not. As much as religion wasn't part of his practice, neither was politics, and although he knew why his people were fighting, he didn't agree that it was doing any good for the country or the people to keep on fighting. Perhaps it was karma, payback for previous sins conceived of by the very people who now fought, but it was definitely something that wasn't going away. His body was lean, he was getting older, now in his 40s, his family depended upon him, and he never let them down. He was soft-spoken, kind yet firm when needed. His wit was sharp, and he knew his role in life better than most, and that is why people had followed him, looked up to him, especially during the more difficult years of late. When he moved, it was with grace and dignity, and without saying much at all. He said a lot. People trusted him by allowing him carte blanche over their goods and services, and often without asking, someone would be there to lend a hand. At the end of the day, mostly very late, he'd return home, report on the day's activities, spend time with his children, and even have the energy to make love with his adoring wife. The house lay beyond the lake, through the fields and swamps where they could cook for guests and friends. They lived a simple life, but the house told of better times, half-finished constructions and unfinished jobs left for many years. His son was now 7 and was a spitting image of his mother, with a sharp nose and pitch black hair like his father. He attended school, played cricket in a local team, and helped out by learning the business of his father. He had hoped that one day there would be a business for him to take over, but with no immediate sign of an end to the war, it was looking unlikely. Chapter 0. From the 4th story, you could see all the way across Central Park. The tops of many trees were there to keep you company. Their canopy flourished, looking like a sea of green, but directly below was a busy street. Pollution oozed from the rear of iron sleds that were driven by focused and important individuals. The windows themselves were a theatre set, and every floor of the building had a different show every day, every hour. Sometimes she would sit on her bed and gaze out the top window at the sky. The blueness would be sketched on by a passing plane and its share of pollution. The most difficult times weren't the morning, because she had somewhere to go. She had a squat little body without the excess of fat or cellulite that hindered many other modern women. Her powdery breasts sat like summoned maidens to a throne, and when she showered in her lavish bathroom, the warm water caressed them, slid down her body, enjoying the silky touch. After, she dressed, and usually quite cheaply, because she wanted to be noticed. Bright red lipstick, short skirts, tops that accentuated the roundness of her bosom, and her hair was teased, just like she wanted to do to men. She didn't know why she did it actually, because she wasn't a slut at all. She wasn't a player, and her bark was much worse than her bite. As she made her way down the stairs to the ground floor where the open kitchen was, she sang Diamonds by Rihanna. In a way, her life seemed as carefree as she assumed hers was. Most days she had a piece of toast with butter and honey, melted butter that is, or else she'd start again. If she was interrupted between cooking the toast and buttering it, she was quick to lose her temper. Along with the toast was orange juice and sometimes boiled egg. She liked to sit at the breakfast bar and pretend that she was at a family breakfast with children running around, a husband stuck behind the New York Times frantically trying to focus before we went out into the world, and the television on in the background with Sesame Street entertaining the kids. Monday to Friday was fine, taken care of, because she went to work past time and admired her boss from afar. Her boss wasn't the greatest of guys. In fact, he was a bit of a douche. She knew that, but there was something sexy about him, and just the fact that he didn't take notice of her made it even more salacious. In the evenings and on weekends, she'd potter about the house. She used to read a lot, but now she had almost entirely given up on the written word and all it stood for. It wasn't a choice she had made for herself. It was just something that kind of happened. Like natural selection. In one of the rooms of her palatial house, she had set up a large board that sat on top of a wooden desk that had previously belonged to her father. On top of the board was an ongoing jigsaw. It was about 1/4 finished. She usually began with the edges and worked away in, concentrating on segments if they showed up. She did all this listening to classical music, usually because it relaxed her, and it was the music she'd grown up with when her mother was still alive. She didn't have a boyfriend or many friends at all. She was generally happy, even if it was contained and sort of weird, but she didn't get depressed or find the need to go out and fuck the first man she saw. Sometimes she'd go out with some girls she still had contact with from school, but mostly she just stayed home. The park was her backyard. Anytime she needed fresh air, the touch of bark, or the sound of infinite frolicking people, she'd walk across the road and head into the living labyrinth. She kept her fitness up by rollerblading along the tracks, people watching as she went. Sometimes she would stop at some water, sit on a log, and try to feed ducks with collected grass or leaves, but they weren't fooled. Often at night she'd watch television. Reruns of oldies but goodies were her passion. Some of her favourite shows were Seinfeld, Friends, MASH, Community, Modern Family, and The X-Files. If she turned the television off early and it was still hours before she went to bed, because she normally went to bed at 10 p.m, she'd sit there in the afterglow of the television set and think about her future, but that didn't happen often. Her future was marked out to a certain degree because money was unimportant, and that's why her job was just a job. It didn't hold any value because beyond filling time, and it definitely wasn't challenging. In those times she did think about her future. She would be catapulted back into the past, to her childhood when she played with the neighbours. That was before the other brownstones were knocked down for progress. To some degree, her future was linked with her past, just as anybody's was, but for her it was perhaps less of an urgency and more of a ponderance. She always came to the same conclusion, and when it was necessary to make a choice to change her life, she would know, and she would act accordingly. Her mother instilled in her a sense of balance and rhythm, and her father's last words to her were, "You are a very bright girl. You will always know what to do for yourself and you must trust what you feel in your heart. Those words meant the world to her because she could hear his voice spoken as if he were still alive, and so she inscribed them on a block of wood that she found in Central Park not long after he had passed. The great branch had fallen in a storm, and before it could be found by some of the park officers, she dragged it home and slowly tore the bark away and fashioned her father's last words into the raw skin. Okay, guys, that's it for this week. So next week, chapter 1. Thank you, Carl.